Good morning. It's Thursday, January 6th. It's the first anniversary of the insurrection, the first anniversary of the invasion of the Capitol by a mob. And I can say that even though it is contrary to what this video clip of Republican politicians had to say about it. Now, these are members who represent districts around this country. So it's a sad, sad situation that I bring up today in the fact of how the American public was misled about the events that took place in the Capitol, on the Capitol, on the police force of the Capitol, on everybody in Washington that day. So take a second to watch this clip for about a minute and a half, and then I'll go on with my discussion. Thank you.
This hearing is called the Capitol insurrection. Let's be honest with the American people. It was not an insurrection, and we cannot call it that and be truthful. The House floor was never breached, and it was not an insurrection. This is the truth. There was an undisciplined mob. There were some rioters and some who committed acts of vandalism. But let me be clear. There was no insurrection, and to call it an insurrection, in my opinion, is a bold-faced lie.
Was January 6th an insurrection, or could it be more accurately described as a mob of misfits committing disorderly conduct, violent entry, civil disorder, vandalism, unlawful entry, etc.? You know, the crimes that these people were actually charged with.
At 2:07, a mob of Trump supporters breached the steps. I don't know who did a poll that is Trump supporters.
In fact, it was Trump supporters who lost their lives that day, not Trump supporters who were taking the lives of others.
I've repeatedly asked for the Capitol footage from before and during January 6th. Such footage would provide answers, could contain exculpatory evidence regarding the outrageous accusations against members of Congress, and most importantly, exonerate the many Americans who peacefully protested and never set foot in the Capitol.
Democrats have said the events of the Capitol on January 6th were an assault on our democracy. And if that's true, if disorderly conduct in a restricted building is an assault on democracy, then what do we call setting fire to a federal court in Portland, Oregon, where people inside, what do we call that?
19 people died during BLM riots last year. Hundreds and hundreds were injured. 2,000 police officers were injured from BLM riots last year. And yet, we're going to discuss today, as if none of that happened, the events of January the 6th. The hypocrisy of this body is indeed disturbing.
So, you saw that. And the first gentleman, Andy Clyde, he opens with, "Let's be honest with the American people." When's the last time you heard anybody say that about our politicians? Let's be honest with the American people. And he is being honest. He thinks he's being honest with the crap that he explains. It's not an insurrection, and you can't call it that and be truthful. Well, what was it? A riot? Just a normal gathering of tourists? Where's he coming from that he believes that he can sell that crap to the American people? Well, here's my problem. He can. And in many parts of this country, he did. And they loved him. Of course, he's from Georgia. And we know a lot about the politicians in Georgia. I mean, he's a cohort of Marjorie Taylor Greene. I don't have to say more than that. And then you have Pat Fallon, with a representative from Texas, another great state. So he says you could accurately describe these people as a group of misfits. Yes, they committed violent entry and civil disorder and vandalism. Those are the crimes they are. But there were no insurrection. They were crimes. Big deal. What's the big deal about a couple of crimes? Only a few hundred people trying to climb the walls and get into the Capitol wearing body armor and stuff. So he's got it really nailed down. Just a group of misfits. Then you got the jerk from South Carolina, this guy Ralph Norman, who's saying Trump supporters. Who said they were Trump supporters? We're not sure who they were. And then you have another moron from Georgia, this guy Jody Heiss, who's saying it was Trump supporters who lost their lives that day. Trump supporters. Well, I don't think the 5 cops that lost their lives on that day and the following day were Trump supporters. I don't know where these guys get the right to complain about the people who lost their lives. Those people didn't have to be in the Capitol building. They didn't have to be climbing the walls. They didn't have to be challenging the police. 140 policemen were injured in this non-insurrection. So where are these guys come from? It's a terrible reflection on the people of these states that these kinds of people can be elected. And Heiss went on to say that the Trump supporters were not the ones who were taking the lives of others. They were the ones that were dying. I don't know what video he was watching. It must have been some old episode of The Twilight Zone. You remember that show, The Twilight Zone? That's, I think, where these guys all were. They were hanging out in the Twilight Zone. And then you've got Paul Gosar complaining that he wants to see the actual footage of what was going on at the Capitol that day, because those pictures would contain evidence that proved that the outrageous accusation against the perpetrators was false, and that those people never set foot in the Capitol. And then you have the last two gentlemen, Biggs and Higgins, who want to compare what happened on January 6th to other events. And so you got Biggs saying about this courthouse in Portland that was overrun by people. Well, that event happened in the middle of the night. The courthouse was empty. Everybody had gone home. This is a group of protesters who broke into the courthouse. But they weren't doing what the people were doing at the Capitol. They were in the courthouse in the middle of the night, an empty courthouse. They were the only ones around. Nobody was in danger. Nobody died in that incident. And then you've got Higgins, who's complaining about the BLM protests. And many of the BLM protests end up with some event like broken windows and looting and general chaos. But those are not by the protesters. Those are people who have infiltrated that event and taken advantage of the crowds and came there specifically to do damage to people. So you can't equate, in my mind, any of these other events with what took place at the Capitol. Yes, we have protests around the country that get out of hand. We have abortion protests. We have BLM protests. We have protests in front of schools about wearing masks and everything. But nothing is like the insurrection, and I use that word correctly, that took place at the Capitol that day. And these Congress people, representatives of the people of the United States, are way off base. And it's a clear indication that they do represent the people of their state, the people of their county. They represent those people. And so when you look at the big picture, you recognize the fact that our country is in bad shape. You recognize the fact that there are many in this country that are unhappy and are willing to listen to the lies that are being perpetrated by their public servants, the lies that are being told to cover up what actually went on January 6th. There's no question in my mind that it was an insurrection, and the footage clearly showed that. So these people who are pretending to know better than the video footage shows are doing a great disservice to all of us. And it's going to take us years to recover from this event. So that's it. in remembrance of January 6th and the awful things that happened that day. Have a good day. Bye.